What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And Jay from Renegade Media posted a video the other day about the MA and some of its members and wives and the commission and whatnot. A lot of you guys probably saw it. And so I wanted to talk about that, and specifically around this idea of suing people on YouTube or just kind of suing folks in general for content that you don't like or people talking about you or whatever. And this has application not just in the context of YouTubers and prison gangs, but the Trump lawsuit or the Trump trial that's going on with the gag order and all kinds of stuff. So this is not going to be a long video. I know I haven't posted in a while. I'm using a different program, and I've kind of taken some steps to try to level up the way that I'm able to present information. And this is kind of a test run on this topic, and then I have plenty more that I want to share using this format. So you guys let me know what you think. Right? Does it work for you? Doesn't it? Leave me a comment and give me a heads up, and then obviously stay tuned for for other videos coming soon. But so for this one, let's go ahead and get into it. Right? So slander. First, let's make sure we're using the same language. Right? Slander is when you're talking shit. Okay. Libel is when you're writing shit, and defamation is the shit, right? And here is the comment that was left on Renegade Media's video when he first made that video about the MA, right? If you don't want a lawsuit against you, I'm asking you to take this post down ASAP. You have no right posting pictures without consent. You are slandering here. So if you're thinking you're going to make money off this, you will be hearing from a lawyer soon. So right now it's ceased and desist. First of all, if you're gonna issue a cease and desist, you should probably, put down the needle and pick up a dictionary and make sure that you spell it right. But beyond that, there's actually a lot in this comment that I'm gonna unpack, right? So now that we're using the same language, let's look at what is defamation, right? First of all, it's false. Now there's an exception to that, and I'll get to that in this video. But generally speaking, defamation, talking shit about somebody, for it to count, it has to be a lie. It has to be not true, right? It has to involve a specific person or at least a small group of people. So if you say, hey, the high school basketball team down the street, they're all using dope, then you might face a defamation case, right? That might work. If you say, oh, all the people in San Francisco are idiots, that's too large of a group, right? It's not going to work. There's no steadfast rule, so to speak, but most courts have adopted the idea of it's around 25 people. If you're talking about somebody that could be narrowed down, then that's cool. But if it's a group that's more than 25 people, then a defamation case probably isn't going to work. It has to be published, right? Published doesn't just mean a video put up on YouTube or a newspaper article. It's anytime it's been seen by two or more people. So if you're at work and you make a screensaver for your computer and you're like, hey, Susie next to me is a home wrecking whore with, AIDS, then and you have a little arrow pointing, right? Uh as long as two or more people could possibly have seen that, then it would count as being published. If it's just you and Susie in the office, it's a pretty jerk move, but it's not necessarily defamation. The writer needs to be at fault, either at fault because they know what they're saying is not true, or at fault because a reasonable person should know that that's not true. If I publish an article and I say in the article, or I say in a video, right? Hey, maybe Joe is a serial killer, right? And maybe Jane is a prostitute, and maybe this, and maybe that. Um, those technically maybe anything is true about anybody, right? But there should be some level of diligence if you're gonna make claims about people. The other thing is it needs to be harmful. Now, most of the time, this is harmful in some type of a financial way, right? The person got fired from their job, or they lost out on a contract, or they had to move away from their house because they kept getting egged and teepeed, or something. It can also just be reputation, right? But if your neighbor right? Let's say your neighbor's having a party and you overhear your neighbor telling one of the folks at their party, oh man, you know, rascals are drunk, right? Now if this was some time ago, it could have been true, but you know, all that dude's, an alcoholic, or that dude's on dope, or that dude, beats his kids, or something else. Technically, you can say, okay, well, that's false, right? And it's, they're talking about me, so it's less than 25 people. There's more than two people there that heard it, and that person knows that they're just talking shit, right? So therefore, it's harmed me, it's harmed my reputation. I'm gonna sue them for defamation. That doesn't necessarily work, right? Because all the people in that house believing that about me, I have to show how that produces some type of harm, right? How that messes me up. And if I can't do that, then it's going to be hard to press forward with the suit. So, where does all this come from? Once upon a time, and I know off the bat, some of you guys were seeing slides and you're like, oh, this is going to be a long, like, college lecture. It's not, right? Trust me. But once upon a time, it was against the law criminally to talk about public officials, right? You couldn't talk about the church. That was considered blasphemy, right? You can go to jail. You couldn't talk about the king. You couldn't talk about the leaders. You can go to jail. That's not the case here, right? It's not the case in the United States. Um, New York Times versus Sullivan is kind of a famous case. So in 1960, this New York Times, it's not even an article, it's actually an ad, but that you see right here, was taken out by a bunch of people who supported Dr. Martin Luther King, right? And it was talking about the abuse that people, particularly black people, were facing in the South, especially in Alabama, at the hands of law enforcement. And it said stuff like Martin Luther King had been arrested like 7 times, which in reality, he had only been arrested like 4 times. And it said people were arrested at the lunch counter while singing We Shall Overcome. And in reality, people were arrested at the lunch counter, but they weren't singing, right? So there was little discrepancies in there. The overall message of the ad, right, was accurate, but there were certain things that were not. So this dude Sullivan, who was in charge of the police, I think in Selma, said, "Hey, the New York Times needs to issue a retraction. They need to come out and say that this ad was BS." And he sued the people who sponsored the ad and the New York Times for posting it, and said, "Hey, they're telling lies. They're telling lies about us, right?" And the Alabama court, right, all white jury, was like, "Yeah, absolutely." But then the New York Times took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, there's this First Amendment right, and people have the right to criticize public officials, right? And this individual was a public official, right? Everybody criticized was a public official in this ad. And so you have to show actual malice. You have to show that it's not just an innocent mistake, but people are intentionally saying stuff that's not true in order to kind of bring that harm, right? And this applied to public officials, and that part's important. So then move forward a little bit, right? That was like 1964, the case went before the Supreme Court. Like less than 10 years later, here's this other case, Gertz versus Welch. That dude in the picture is Robert Welch, this horrible human being, founder of the John Birch Society, right? And Gertz was this attorney from New York, okay? And there's this youngster in New York who had gotten killed by a police officer. The police officer went to trial. He got found guilty of, I think, like second-degree murder, something like that. And then the family wanted to sue the police or sue the officer or something like that for the wrongful death of their loved one, right? And so Gertz was the attorney for that civil lawsuit, right? Well-known attorney at the time. And Robert Welch had these publications. I think it was like the American Opinion or something like that, where he would point out all kinds of right-wing conspiracy shit, right? And so he starts putting out these opinion pieces that say, hey, uh, Gertz is this Leninist. Gertz is this communist. There's this big communist plot to get young people and to make the police look like the police are ending their lives without reason, to destabilize our democracy and all this other shit, right? And so, Gertz turns around and he sues. And he's like, hey, saying stuff about me that's not true, blah, blah, blah. He wasn't a communist. He had no ties to the political belief system. There was a bunch of stuff in there that was not accurate. And Welch tried to use the argument that the New York Times argued, and said, well, hey, I just made a couple little innocent mistakes, but I have a right to criticize them. And the court turned around and said, there is a difference between people in the public eye and private folks, right? And this dude was a private person. Yes, he was an attorney in a civil case, but he wasn't a public figure. He didn't have anything to do with the criminal trial. The dude was already found guilty. Like, he's just somebody doing his job. He doesn't work for the government. He's not a movie star or a celebrity or anything else. So no, there's a different standard, right? You can't just talk shit like that about regular Joes, kind of. But it also said that the burden is now on the victim, right? If you are gonna make an argument, you have to show that the person who said these things about you knew that what they were saying is not true, right? So in this case, Gertz, the attorney, had to prove that Welch and his society of people and the publication knew that they were just saying a bunch of stuff about him that wasn't true, which he was able to do, and he won in the lawsuit. And that case also pointed out, hey, public figures got greater access to cameras and newspapers and that kind of stuff. If you say something out of pocket about a celebrity, about a public figure, about somebody in government, they can turn around and get on TV or get an interview or, these days get on social media, go on a podcast and correct the record pretty easily, as opposed to just the average Joe, average Jane on the street. They don't have access to that kind of bully pulpit and that microphone. And also, a lot of public figures feel like all publicity is good publicity, right? So it's just a different standard. Okay. So then in the 80s comes these slap lawsuits, right? Strategic lawsuit against public participation. And what that was is powerful people suing folks in the public for defamation in order to silence them, right? So, for example, a developer wants to build this housing unit, right? And the people around there don't want to build for whatever reason, right? They're trying to save the lizards or protect mosquitoes or something, right? So they start doing online petitions and they start putting signs in their yard and everything else saying, hey, these people are going to build this development. It's going to come here and it's going to pollute all the water, right? Now, these developers would then turn around and sue those people and say, hey, that's defamation. You got to stop. And granted, it would take a long time for that case to go through the court. But in the meantime, those people had to be quiet. And the powerful people, in this case, the developers, got what they wanted. They got to silence public opinion, which then allowed them to move forward and do what they wanted to do without criticism. And there was a pattern of this, right? Of all kinds of people in powerful positions doing this. And so the courts in like 33 states, including California, Nevada, and most states, have turned around and said, no, we recognize the hustle and you can't do that, right? So now if you sue somebody and they feel like that's what you're doing, they can tell the court, nah, we think this is a slap lawsuit. And then the court will basically have an evidence hearing very early on to determine if there's any merit to the claim. So that way, if there's not, then people get to keep complaining or doing whatever it is that they're doing, right? So there's a brief overview. There you go. Less than 15 minutes. The history of First Amendment and defamation laws and whatnot. So, right to privacy. This is where it is actually possible for a YouTuber to be sued, right? Do I think that's going to happen in this case with Jay? Absolutely not. I don't. But again, is it possible? Yes. And under this, right? So most states, including California, including Nevada, have a right to privacy. And social media has really kind of made this a thing, where private people have a right to remain private. Okay. Now, let's say, for example, you have a lady and when she's younger, she is working the streets, right? She's turning tricks, she's doing her thing, she's with a dude, she winds up getting arrested for a hot one, right? She gets found not guilty, and she moves on. She goes across the country, and she marries some other guy, so her last name changes. She has kids, and now she's just a soccer mom with the minivan and the whole 9 yards. Right? And somebody finds out about her past and decides, oh shit, this would make for a good story. So they run a story. Hey, did you know that Susie the Soccer Mom was really a, hoeing back in the days and just fool got whacked and blah, blah, blah. Now her new circle of friends that don't know anything about her life before are all looking at her crazy. She gets fired from her job. She feels embarrassed. She has to go to the psych and start taking meds. She has to move. Her husband doesn't want to be with her, whatever, right? All of the above. So she can sue the folks that put that story out there, right? Because they took something that was private information about a private person and made it public. And those allegations would offend a reasonable person, right? Some people would say, "Oh, well, I don't even care if anybody knew what I was doing back in the days. Like, I'm not ashamed." Okay, but a reasonable person who's a soccer mom doesn't want to be outed as, formerly working the streets, right? So, it would offend a reasonable person. It has no legitimate public concern. Okay, um, that her past behavior really has nothing to do with the way she's living her life now. Now, if somebody had a bunch of allegations and accusations of weirdo conduct when they were younger, and now same situation, change their name, move forward across the country, but they're working with kids, now that could be different. There might be a legitimate public concern, right? And also, it's not newsworthy. Like nobody really cares about Susie the Soccer Mom besides her little circle of friends, right? So, uh, breaking a story about her, like who cares? To put this in context, let's say that, like a YouTube type of sense, right? Let's say that my neighbor is a rat, right? He snitched back in the days. He's just a construction worker, but I happen to find proof that he snitched when he was a teenager, and I make a YouTube video about it. I'm like, damn man, fool, my neighbor's a snitch, and I put him on blast. Here's his picture, here's his name, everything else. He could sue me, right? He could sue me, and but this is a case where, remember I said before, um, normally if you're telling the truth, you're protected against defamation. This is an instance where the truth doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that what I'm saying is true. I'm invading his privacy by putting him on blast, and it doesn't really meet any of the other stuff on this little PowerPoint, right? But now G-Face, for example, I pulled his covers, right? There was not a single video online anywhere that was saying that G-Face was a hood hopping rat until I made one like a year and a half ago, right? And I put all the information out there. I put his paperwork out there. I put all the other stuff out there. Now, could he have sued me? No. And I mean, he could have tried, but it wouldn't have worked. And the reason that it wouldn't have worked is this fool was just on a video, right? A little semi-viral video, clutching a banger, talking about you better check in. It's double edged. Whoa, whoa, gang banging, flexing, putting forth this persona. He's a rapper. He's a public figure, and he's advocating this lifestyle. He's advocating this culture, and I thought it was newsworthy that he's full of shit, right? So he probably wouldn't have won that, right? In the Renegade Media case, is there really any argument that would hold up in court? No. Like these dudes are all validated MA members that are in the general population, so obviously their status is still, upheld, right? His old lady's indicted by the cops, accused of all this criminal stuff. So the Facebook profile was public. There's no real invasion. It's borderline. It probably would not go very well, and it certainly wouldn't be a good look. And that's my last point before I wrap this up. Right? If you're affiliated with one of these organizations, with any organization, any criminal network, right? If you want to call it that, and you see a video that somebody makes about you or makes about your organization, and you don't like it, you have a lot of options. Okay, I would suggest leaving a comment under your name or identifying yourself and making a claim like the one that was made in this case is probably the worst fucking option for you to take. Okay. Because for one, you're using your actual real name. and you're putting in there information where we know that law enforcement watches a lot of these channels that talk about crimes and gangs and that kind of stuff, especially coming out of California, especially when you're talking about one of the major criminal organizations, right? So, especially for the larger channels, right? Renegade Media got 100,000 subs, right? And Mexican Mafia all in the title. So, you got to assume that law enforcement is watching that, right? Whether casually, just, on their free time or as a job or whatever, they're watching. What do they see when they look at that? Damn, this fool got a cell phone. Clearly, right? He's not leaving comments in his tablet. He got a cell phone. Yeah. Let's go hit his pad. Let's go see what he's got. Right? Let's use this against him later, right? In future proceedings. You also bring a lot more buzz about it, right? So if that comment is not left, then Jay's not doing a video later on that day talking about why he took the video down and how he was told this and that. And I'm probably not making this video because I thought wouldn't have necessarily crossed my mind. So it's just more attention brought to the subject. Plus, when you talk about suing somebody, you're talking about snitching. You're talking about telling. That's what it is. At least in my time frame. If you look to law enforcement, the government, whatever, to help you get even with people that you don't like or anything like that, that is telling. That is snitching. That is working with the enemy, right? Cowardice dealing with the enemy. Like it again, I know things have changed a lot, but that's what it is. And you just put on a public platform that that's what you want to do. Whether it's a real threat or not doesn't matter. It's not a great look for the organization. And so I just think it was a foolish move. I don't think a lawsuit would happen. You'd have to know where somebody lives in order to serve them. Like there's a lot of technical details, but I already said this video wasn't going to be long and it's a little bit longer than I thought. So I'll actually end it with this part about Trump. The gag order, right? It goes back to the cases that I had just mentioned, right? So Trump has a First Amendment right to criticize the government, to criticize the process. So the gag order is not stopping him from talking about the judge in the Stormy Daniels case. And it's not stopping him from talking about the prosecutor in the Stormy Daniels case, because those are public figures. And he's criticizing them within the context of their job, right? This is a witch hunt, all this other stuff. You can do that. As an American, you have a First Amendment right to criticize your government and not be punished for it, okay? Now, what the gag order says is you can't go after the judge's family, right? Because the judge's daughter, who Trump has gone after before, has nothing to do with the proceedings. She is not a public official. She is just the daughter of the judge, right? You can't go after the DA's family. You can't go after the jurors. The jurors are just private citizens, anonymous, at least for the time being, who are kind of doing their civic duty, right? They're not really players in this. I mean, they have an important role, but they're not government agents. They're not employees. They're just fucking people doing jury duty. So you can't pressure them. You obviously can't talk about the folks. What's the little rat dude's name? The attorney Cohen, right? You can't talk about him. You can't talk about Stormy Daniels because they're witnesses, and you can't talk shit about witnesses when you're the defendant in a case. That's against the law for anybody anywhere. It doesn't matter. So that goes to show, though, right? The application of some of this stuff. He can criticize public officials, but he can't just criticize anybody and say whatever he wants. Now, he's already violated the gag order 10 times. It's expected he'll continue to violate it. I think that's a bad look for him. I think it's a bad strategy. This is the judge that's going to decide his punishment. And the odds are he's not earning any really good points with the judge. So I just don't think it's very smart. It is possible that he gets jail time for this if he is found guilty. It is also possible that the judge sentences him to jail time as a punishment for violating a gag order, but that he stays that until after the trial. So he doesn't extend the trial. So I think part of Trump's strategy is, it looks cool if he goes to jail for a couple days or overnight or whatever, right? He could fundraise off it. All his supporters are going to get all excited about it, right? But also it's a delay. it's a delay in the trial. And he's trying to stretch this stuff out so that he doesn't have to face the other trials before he faces the election. But what the judge can do is say, I'm not going to interrupt the flow of the trial. I'm not going to keep the jury here longer and everything else. But when this is all said and done, whether you're found guilty or not guilty, you owe me 2 weeks in a cell, right? And do I think the judge is going to do that? Not right now. I think that's a bit of a stretch, right? The dude is the former president. The judge has acknowledged that. Like, look, you're the former president. You might be the president in the future. Like, I'm trying to go there with you, man, but you keep acting a fool. It is what it is. So I don't think it's a great strategy. But anyways, there's a lot of information packed into, less than 30 minutes at least. You guys let me know, what do you think of this setup? Like me using visual aids and just kind of throwing myself in the corner to go along with the stuff I'm talking about. Does that work? Does it not work? It's up to you. Check out the other content. I'm back. I'm going to be putting more stuff out. I got the Aryan Brotherhood paperwork. I got all kinds of stuff to talk about. So stay tuned, man. Help others move with excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Help your community because they need you. And I really appreciate you guys, man. Take care.